Morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series, A Senior's Guide to Building a Modular ADU. This is part 2 of 10, titled The Project Address, specifically where to put it. This is brought to you by Mr. John Aronson, President and owner of Crest Backyard Homes, and myself, Jeremy Knock, President and owner of Golden Age Financial Solutions. This webinar series will take you from initial idea all the way through the certificate of occupancy using the HECM loan to maximize your cash flow. This is brought to you every Tuesday and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Keep in mind the sessions will be recorded and available to share and watch later. We will be addressing all the questions at the end for the Q&A portion. Each of these sessions is only about 20 minutes long, and so at the end we take the Q&A. If you think of a question in the meantime, please make sure to type it into the question box, but we'll get to them at the very end. So today, specifically, we will be exploring what location to put the ADU on and the various questions you need answers to in order to help guide your decisions in that.
Well, thanks, Jeremy, and a special thanks to all you folks who've taken time out of your day to join us on this beautiful San Diego morning. If you don't mind indulging me for a couple of moments, I'm compelled to go a bit off script this morning. Believe me, I don't make it a practice to start out on such a sad note, but I have to preface this segment with a very disturbing prelude. I saw a news segment yesterday that actually woke me up with a cold sweat in the middle of the night. Not sure if any of you folks saw it, and truthfully, part of me hopes you didn't. But at 74 years old, it had to be one of the most horrific and disturbing things I've ever seen. I wish it had been just a fictitious movie, but unfortunately, it was just all too real. I never thought I'd see anything like this in America. The abuse that so many of we seniors deal with each and every day in many nursing homes, assisted and non-assisted living elder care facilities throughout our country is not only obscene, but one of the most barbaric and sadistic things I've ever seen. What I saw was not only inhumane, it was downright torturous. I'm not going to go into any detail, but if you didn't see it, you should definitely try to Google it up. I'm truly and deeply saddened by the abuse going on with elder care in America today. Bottom line, if you have the ability to stay out of the elder care system, be it public or private, I strongly not only urge you, but I plead with you to do so. This really brings it all home, both literally and figuratively for Jeremy and I, and gives what we're doing here today not only a purpose, but it makes it a mission. Okay, I got that out of my system. Let's get back on solid footing, shall we? So Jeremy, why don't you review with us some of the logic behind deciding where to place your ADU?
Absolutely, John. So as John mentioned earlier, thinking this about the future with the care system and where you're going to actually end up as a senior, thinking about where to put this is going to be critical. And there are several things to consider when I ask someone, where are you going to put the ADU? And I don't just mean where in the yard, because you have many options potentially. Now, obviously, if you only have one property, the decision of which property to put it on is kind of a no-brainer. But after you decide on the actual address, then the specific spot on the property will need to be assessed. If you do have an additional rental property or two, and you're considering building the ADU on your adult child's property or maybe the rental property, you're going to have many more options and many more specific locations to consider for the project. You really want to be thinking about a few things. First off, who will the end user be? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be a renter off Craigslist that you don't know and you just found him and stuck him in there as a renter? Is it going to be your close family or friends that you're going to rent to or potentially just let use? Is it going to be extra space for family for vacations, or is it going to be specifically a rental to help with cash flow? Each of these options brings up different choices of location that you'll need to make early in the planning stages.
Okay, so why is it such a big decision to, early in the planning stages, as you put it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, John. When you consider the end user and the overall purpose for the ADU, it will start to shape your idea. It will help to guide you to the best location on the property, as well as the orientation of the ADU. So what that ultimately does is helps you control the environment. And by that, I mean the potential interaction with and between those living in the house and the ADU. And depending on who is going to be using which dwelling, that can have a huge impact on the quality of life everyone living there will have. It can help control traffic flow, and I don't just mean vehicles, I mean foot traffic, which in turn can help control noise levels. And things like that contribute to overall happiness of a tenant and a landlord, which then contributes to lower vacancy rates and higher profits.
Well, that's definitely a major part of the decision-making process. So now why don't you share what you bring to the table as an expert to make it all run smoothly?
Of course. So let's just start at the beginning with the simplest possible scenario. You only have one property and it's your primary residence. The first question to ask is, what is the purpose of the ADU here? With that answer, you can start to think about who is going to be interacting and how. Is it going to function as a guest house for when the kids and grandkids come to visit? Are you going to advertise on Craigslist and stick a renter in there? Will you be moving into the ADU so that your family can move into the main house, either as an option to help them save money or for you to command a bigger rent? Will you be moving into the ADU so that you can rent the main house out for even more cash flow to a stranger? Now, as John mentioned earlier, the in-home care aspect of this is absolutely profound when you really start to put the pen to the paper and think about your future. Is this going to be for an in-home caregiver so that you can provide them room and board, thereby bringing down the cost of your in-home care? And there's several strategies we're going to be addressing in future sessions where we really dive deeper into how to think about that. So when you consider the end user and the overall purpose for the ADU, it will clarify where you want to build it and where you want it facing. Starting the process with this decision really makes a difference in how smoothly the rest of your decisions go.
Yeah, it really does. We found that once you identify your purpose, the rest seems to kind of fall into place. Now, why don't you walk us through a few considerations for the location and orientation as if you were putting the ADU on your own property?
I'd be glad to. So if this is the space for the kids and grandkids to come visit, consider facing the living space toward the main area of the backyard. That way you have a much more inclusive environment. I mean, think about it. You can open the back door, walk out, the grandkids are playing on the lawn. It's everything you wanted it to be in retirement. Now, let's say you want a little bit more privacy, but you still want that same inclusive feeling. You could potentially run the ADU perpendicular to the property and offset to the main house so that you're not staring into each other's living spaces. I mean, if you want to have your coffee in your bathrobe in the morning, you don't necessarily want to be staring at your in-laws in their bathrobes as well. Now, if you're going to stick that renter off of Craigslist in there, you're going to want to think about maybe dropping this ADU into the furthest back corner of the lot that you can put it, oriented away from the main house, and fully enclosed by either a fence or shrubs or both. And you have to think about that in the early planning stages, because if you don't, it's going to make it very challenging to add things like hardscape and fencing later on. Now, if this is going to be a situation where you're moving in, who's going to rent the main house? If it's family, the same things I mentioned apply for the inclusion aspect of it. If it's going to be a stranger, you're probably going to want to lean towards the privacy school of thought. Now, if this is for an in-home caregiver so that you can provide them room and board, thereby bringing down the cost of your in-home care, will you be moving into the ADU and having the in-home caregiver move in with you? Are you going to stay in the main house and have the ADU be the housing for the in-home caregiver? So things like bedroom and bathroom counts are with those answers are start to become easier to decide on. And these answers not only help you to select the location, the orientation, but they narrow down things like elevation in the ADU, which contributes to ideas for floor plans and ADA compliance, as well as the bedroom and bathroom counts. And ADA compliance is something to think about right now in the planning stage, because in the future, if you need additional in-home care and you decide that that's the place you're going to age in place forever, you're going to want to make sure it potentially has things like wheelchair access and things like easily accessible bathtubs and countertop heights and hallways and doorways that are all wide enough to accommodate those things, not just today, but maybe 10 years down the road.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And believe me, coming from firsthand experience, I can tell you it costs a lot more to retrofit an existing structure for ADA compliance than it does if you just plan it from the get-go and then you have it there available for you when you need it. When you have a core decision like that guiding you, it takes a lot of the stress and guesswork out of the decision-making process as well. When you feel stuck or overwhelmed, and at times you will, you can't fall back on that to help you decide how to move forward. So Jeremy, Why don't you just take us through some of those questions for rental property scenario?
Definitely, John. So let's start at the beginning on this one too. This is where a little research and thought go a long way. Start by understanding what kind of neighborhood is the rental property is in and who the neighbors are or will be. Is it near a lively college like maybe an SDSU? Or is this a much quieter suburb full of families with children where everyone's in bed by 9 o'clock? Once you have that figured out, then you can go to what the purpose is. Is it going to be the guest house for your family and friends? Is it going to be increased rental income specifically for more cash flow on that property? You'll also need to consider who is currently renting there now in that house before you build the ADU on there, because there will be construction going on, and so you do have to take that into consideration. You'll want to ask yourself questions like, is this going to be a forever piece of real estate? Is this real estate going into to stay in your real estate portfolio as a legacy property for your heirs? All those questions help to guide your answers on where you're going to determine the final location and orientation, because those things can contribute to things like the noise and the tenant interaction. And those can be critical to keeping good renters in the property for a long time. Low vacancy rates keep profits and cash flowing.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Love low vacancy rates, keep profits and cash flow. I like that. I think I'll coin it. All right, so speaking of keeping tenants in place, why don't you take us through some of the things that keep in mind for a real rental property scenario with like a new backyard home?
Absolutely. So if this is a rental property near a college campus, you may want to think about a more central facing and inclusive orientation. That can really bring everyone together, and that keeps vacancy rates low. If everyone happens to be college students, they really liked the social aspect of things. So you do want to keep in mind, though, if you're bringing everyone together in the center of that property, this can cause higher noise levels. So make sure you do your homework first. You could consider offsetting that ADU a bit to add some privacy for each of your renters while keeping the usable space open for communal areas. Now, if the property is in that quiet neighborhood we mentioned, you may want to look at more of the privacy-oriented location and orientation. I do want to point out a few key things that really add a lot of aesthetic as well as value to the property. When you add those things, you just make more money. So when you're building an ADU and you're thinking about who's going to be using it, keep these potential options open. You have things like a full outdoor kitchen or a standalone built-in barbecue area if there's not enough room for the kitchen, a patio with or maybe without a fire pit. You'll also want to remember to plan for parking too, because if you have amenities and convenient parking, you can usually command a higher rent and people will just stay longer.
Vacancies is what it's all about, or not. You don't want them, trust me. As an investor myself, I have to say, sign me up. I like that whole idea. So now, Jeremy, could we switch gears for just a moment? What if someone wanted to build an ADU on their adult child's property? What would they want to start thinking about in that scenario?
Well, this scenario is one I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into. So several of the same questions come up at the beginning. So let's look at just those briefly. So, what's the purpose? Who's going to be spending time there? Is it for you to be spending time there? So if you build it on your adult child's property, is this going to be where you just go spend a summer? Is it going to be where you pop in once a month for a weekend? Is this going to be for you to move into? This is an important question to answer early on, because since the HECM loan has to be done on your primary residence, if you're going to go move into your adult child's property and rent out your current home, it will no longer be your primary residence. So that means you cannot use the HECM loan like that. It is important to note, though, you can do the HECM loan on your primary residence, build the ADU on your adult child's property, and simply go visit that ADU whenever you feel like it, keeping your current home as its primary residence. So one of the topics that do come up in this scenario is who is going to be footing the bill for the ADU and who will be receiving the rents, if any. So if you pay to build the ADU, will the rental income come to you? If you pay to build the ADU, will the rental income go to your children? If it's for you to use occasionally and for them to keep the rents, it's a great use of funds now to pass on inheritance early. This strategy is also a great way to pass on a larger chunk of wealth early that isn't in the form of cash, so that they get a monthly rent pretty much forever, instead of being able to blow through some or all of that rather quickly. Now, no matter who is going to be using it or what it's going to be using it for, adding the ADU to that property is going to be a great way to increase that property's value.
Okay. So now, what if one of our clients had the ability to do more multiple strategies together? Can you walk us through what that would look like?
Sure, John. Now, this is where investors can really start to see rapid growth in their monthly cash flow. If they take the time early on to plan their next several years out, it will make it so they have plenty of extra money to really enjoy their retirement and be able to cover the unexpected expenses in life that it tends to throw at us. So you need to decide first where you want to call your forever home and work backwards from there. Do you want to live in the main house, rent out the ADU? Do you want to live in the ADU and rent out the main house? Do you want to use the rental property as a vacation home and rent out the ADU? Do you want to use the ADU on the rental property as it? So as you start to answer these questions, then you get to start narrowing down the why. Is the ADU going to be used to financially support you as you age in place at your current home? Is it to give the kids a financial boost? Are you going to move into the rental, rent out your main? How's the in-home caregiver? As you start to answer these questions, it'll really help you solidify your direction. Are you going to build this so that you can move into that and your kids can move into the main house to help you out? Are they going to rent it out, keep the money? Or are you going to rent it out and keep the money?
Well, these are all great, necessary questions. But what does that mean in terms of actual cash flow?
Well, this is where the rubber meets the road, John. So if you pair the ADU with the HECM loan strategy, it could mean lots of extra cash flow. Because with a HECM loan, you never have to make a mortgage payment. The money you earn from the rental becomes pure cash flow. So if you built just one ADU on your primary residence and rented it out for about $1,800 a month, which is very, very common anywhere in Southern California. If you built just one ADU on your current rental and rented that out for an additional $1,800 a month, now how much more valuable is that rental property? Because you're not increasing your monthly debt payment on it. It's just applied to the bottom line. So what if you did do one ADU on each property? An additional $3,600 in cash flow is a lot of money. And as an investor, that really helps your debt ratios out. And with all my experience in the business, investor folks, that's usually the number one problem they run into, is that cash flow issue. So what this does is it opens up the possibility of accessing equity out of the rental property later if you wanted or needed it. It gives you more purchasing power overall. And don't forget, the unused portion of the remaining HECM line of credit will actually grow over time. And we'll be further exploring that in our next session, so be sure to tune in.
Sounds like an unbelievable strategy to really set yourself up for a really comfortable retirement. No doubt, this is really the way of the future for retirees, and it sure beats the alternative. And after what I saw just the other night on the news, aging in place is the in the home you raised your family in, with loved ones around you, is the only way to live out your life in comfort and happiness. So where do you want to invest your retirement income and live out your life? In an awful elder care facility where you could be abused and mistreated by strangers who could care less about you, or in the comforts and confines of your own abode with loved ones gently supporting and caring for you?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, John, because we pay a lot of attention to the things that AARP says and does. And AARP is really getting behind the ADU as a movement, because what they found is that 76% of seniors that they surveyed want to age in place. They do not want to move. They don't want to go move into homes. They want to stay put. And so this is the solution for them to stay put and actually enjoy their retirement. And we will be diving very deeply into that in our next session, so be sure to tune in. So if you have questions regarding the ADU specifically, please reach out to Crest Backyard Homes. You can see their web address, www.crestbackyardhomes.com. Go to their website, find their contact form, fill it out, and one of the representatives will be with you shortly. If you have questions specifically regarding the HECM loan, please reach out to us at Golden Age Financial Solutions. Our website is www.goldenaf.com. That's A as in Apple, F as in Frank, goldenaf.com. Now, keep in mind, we do have another webinar coming up on Tuesday. Make sure to look for the invite. Make sure you register, share the link with your friends. Next, we would like to open this up for any questions that we may have. look for the questions box. Let's just jump this out right here. And if you can't see it, there's a in the menu panel on the right-hand side, there's a questions box. Go ahead and jump into that. Feel free to type in your questions, or you can put them in the chat as well. We did have one question regarding the number of ADUs you can do on a duplex. So if somebody's got a 2-unit home, you can actually build 2 separate detached ADUs as well as 1 attached ADU on that property. So if you have a rental property with 2 units, you can turn that from a 2-unit property literally into a 5-unit rental property. So I know that will really maximize your cash flow. And if you use the HECM to do it, again, it's pure cash flow. And that, just so you know, that same rule of thumb does apply to 2 units, 3 units, and 4-unit property. You can build 2 separate detached, and then it's the rule of 25%. So no matter what, you can always build at least a minimum of 1 attached ADU. And if it's a 2-unit, 3-unit, or 4-unit, you can build at least 2 additional units. So let's see if we have any other questions. We did have another question, and that was, how long does it take to complete the HECM loan? The HECM loan takes an average of between 25 and 30 days. Keep in mind, we do that based on the value of your primary residence. We fund that loan on your primary residence, and then you can use the funds anywhere. So you can build a rental property, you can build an ADU on your rental property, you can build an ADU on your primary residence, or you can build both. There's no restrictions on where you can use the money. And when do I get the money? The money is available pretty much at closing. So as soon as we close, you have access to the money. So you're not waiting for it. It's not fund controlled. You have access to it right when you need it, so that you never get slowed down in the building process. And it looks like we had one more question. This one's for John. John, what's the average time frame right now in San Diego to actually complete a modular ADU build?
That is the $64,000 question, probably one of the most broad and general questions we get every day. It's all predicated on the jurisdiction you're pulling the permit in. The actual production time for a modular home is weeks. We're saying in a normal time of the season, 4 to 6 weeks. If you get into more prime time, as we're getting into now, albeit we've been kind of set back with the coronavirus issue, you each week into the summer, your production time increases by a week. So what starts out in the off season as a 4 to 6 week process can end up in the height of season as possibly a 6 to 8, even 12-week process. And that's barring any disasters like fires, floods, earthquakes, etc. That can, all bets are off when something like that happens. When they recently had a fire up in Bonsall, if you remember a few years back, it took out about 50, 70 manufactured homes. That really tied up local manufacturers for several months. It made our production time go, back sometimes 12, 14 weeks. So the permit process on the other side of the coin, that's where you usually run into the snags. It's not so much what we do on the production end. It's more about the permit process. Most of the jurisdictions are starting to wrap their arms around this whole ADU thing quite comfortably now. At first, it was a little skittish. They had a lot of pushback from a lot of the jurisdictions. They weren't cooperating with the state mandate. People were getting very frustrated. And frankly, the costs hadn't come down quite where they are today. They've waived all the entitlement, and most jurisdictions, if not all, have waived environmental impact, environmental and developmental impact fees, which new meters, new gas meters, electric meters, etc. That's what used to cost so much money with an ADU. I remember the time before the ADU laws came into place, when if you went to the county to pull a permit, it would not only take you anywhere from 1 to 2 years to get it, but you had the privilege of spending about 40 grand for it. So things have changed. Right now, you're down around 10 grand, probably 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 6 months, depending on, again, the time of year. And right now with the coronavirus issue again, places are not open. You have to go in by appointment. The process takes a lot longer. We are starting to notice that they are loosening up. The turnaround time is getting shorter. So we hope this thing will all smooth out and transition back to normal in the not too distant future. I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you. So we do have another question here. If my primary residence is on the same lot as my rental, will the value of the entire property be taken into consideration, or just the value of my residence? In other words, 50%. So that's a good question, and I might need a little more detail to answer that. So if it's one parcel, are you asking that you have the primary residence? Do you have a currently built rental property on it? As in, this is now a 2-unit property? Because in that case, the state of California would consider that a multifamily home. And then in that case, you could actually build 2 separate ADUs, 2 separate detached ADUs, and 1 attached ADU. Now, if you're talking about the rental property being the ADU that you would like to build, then that's a whole nother animal. And in that case, no matter what, when the appraiser looks at these things, they're going to take every single structure into account, just so long as it's permitted. If it's unpermitted, they can't take into account any value. But if it is permitted, which all these ADUs are and have to be, the appraiser will take that into consideration. However, it is only after the ADU is built. So if you're planning on using a HECM loan in order to build one of these, what you can do is you can fund the HECM loan, build the ADU, and then 12 months later, when the project is completed and done and you've got a renter in there, we can get it reappraised and refinance that, and realistically probably get you a considerably larger line of credit. So it's a huge value to do this. Let's see. This was more of a comment. It just said, great to know the HECM funds are available to use on rental properties and family-owned properties. And especially now, I don't know if you folks at home know this, but a lot of folks were thinking about using a traditional HELOC, the traditional home equity line of credit, to pay for the ADU. And some of the biggest players in the industry, Chase Bank stopped doing them about a month ago. Wells Fargo stopped doing them about 2.5 weeks ago now. So they're no longer there. And I want to point out, it's very, very important to keep this in mind if you currently have one of these and you're thinking about using it to do this. When this happened in 2007, 8, and 9, lenders shut the trade lines off. So it didn't matter. You could have $1 million line of credit and you owed 10 grand on it. They turned that thing down. So your available line was 10 grand. And as you paid it down, that availability went away as well. So if you're thinking you're going to use a HELOC for this, just a word of caution, it could potentially get shut off on you at any time. Now, the difference is the HECM lines of credit, since they are FHA insured, they can never be reduced and never be revoked. So if you fund one of those lines and you start building on it, you always have that available line of credit, just so long as you meet your loan obligations.
Can I add something to that?
Yep.
Okay, and now, did you address the cash out refis?
Hold on one second. I'll come back to that because we had the clarification on there. So they said this is one parcel. There are 2 units on it now, and the second structure is already built. I want to add an ADU. So what you have the potential to do is actually add 2 detached ADUs and 1 additional attached ADU. Because those structures already exist, you have what is considered a multifamily home according to the state of California, regardless of what your zoning actually is. Even if it's just an R1, but you have 2 properties on there, it is now considered a multifamily home according to these new state ADU laws. And you now have the capacity to put 2 ADUs, detached ADUs on there, and 1 attached ADU, which is an incredible opportunity to potentially turn that property into a huge cash flowing piece.
And that's a good example of how they're changing the rules just about as often as we change the sheets on our beds.
Absolutely. So John, let me just touch back on that that cash out refi question. So the cash out refi question, depending on which type of cash out refinance you're doing, if it's a renovation loan, you have to use the money on that specific property, and it will be fund controlled. So it's going to be very, very carefully managed. You really don't have any autonomy. You have to go through the whole planning and process and deal with the fund control manager, and it's a constant back and forth battle between getting things signed off and then getting the money released and then starting the next stage of the process. And so that can really, really contribute to delays in the process. So,
well, I got to add to that as a contractor that has to deal with fund control. That is one of the most frustrating processes we have to go through.
absolutely. And so I want to touch just this one last piece on the cash out refinance, and that goes back to just the average homeowner, average home builder, as well as the very savvy investor, and that is debt ratio issues. So if you want to build an ADU, if you do not have the financial capacity to pay for that debt, you do not get that loan, which means you do not get that ADU, which means you do not get that cash flow. So using the HECM loan, we don't care about debt ratios. All we care about is residual income, and that's it. And there's a minimum residual income to meet. Just so long as you meet that, and there's equity in that property, I can get you that loan. So do not let those things like debt ratios be the things that prevent you from calling me, because I can walk you through the process. And most people are very, very pleasantly surprised at how much money they can actually access with these things and what it really means for them and their families.
Well, I have to say, as a real estate broker as well, this whole coronavirus thing has really thrown a clog in the spokes of the entire financial industry. And the jury's out. We don't know where this is all going to end up. We have no clue where this is going to go in terms of values of property and when people are going to actually get back to work, if they're going to get back to work, what strain it's going to put on the housing market overall. Bottom line, what I see happening, the HECM loan, the seniors are going to really probably be the best and the most beneficial recipients of future lending, at least for the foreseeable future, maybe not for the long-term future until things get, until we bounce back with our economy, and hopefully will. But I mean, the HECM loan is definitely, and I've been writing this right now with Jeremy for quite some time, and I see the progress he's making, and I see the value added to the whole concept. And it is a wave of the future for seniors. There is a way to go.
I agree. So we got one last question, and then we're about at our hard stop here. So it's I checked the zoning for the property I'm thinking about building. You said earlier that 2-unit could be a 5-unit. It's in San Diego. There are 2 detached homes and 1 detached garage. The zone name says R1-R. Can you clarify how we can find out what's possible for that jurisdiction? So I do want to clarify. So legally, it will still be a 2-unit property. Those detached ADUs do not change the classification. They don't turn it into a 5-unit property. It's still considered a residential 2-unit property. You are adding 3 additional units if you decide to build the 2 detached ADUs and do the attached ADU. So your local jurisdiction, if you just find your local county's website, will be able to help you out with that. And then actually do me a favor and reach out to crestbackyardhomes.com, and John will actually be able to guide you exactly where to find what you're looking for. One last question. So it says, I understand these reverse mortgages are designed for seniors. Does this mean that a millennial or 45-year-old homeowner cannot apply for the HECM loan? That is correct. You have to be at least 62 years old or older. Now, there's one caveat, and that is if you are married and your spouse is younger than 62. If one of the parties is 62 or older, you can then apply for the HECM loan. However, they will base the loan on the younger of the two, and anyone that's under 62, what it does is it starts to reduce the available benefit that folks can access. So I always laugh because anyone that challenges these loans, I always ask them the same thing. If you were 35 and could get a loan where you never had to make a mortgage payment and you could live in that home for the rest of your life as long as you lived, and the loan's completely non-recourse, meaning you can never owe more on the home than it's worth, would you take it? And I've never had anyone say no. So,
well, I guess that's one reason to get some of these younger gals marrying older guys like me.
Maybe we should start a dating service, John.
There we go.
All right. Well, thank you, folks, for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Make sure you look for the next link and make sure you register for the next webinar we have coming up on Tuesday. We look forward to seeing you there.